Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last event in our Life After Stroke series for 2022. My name is Avril Drummond. I am the chair of the European Life After Stroke Forum Scientific Committee. So we set up the European Life After Stroke Forum in 2019 because there were so few opportunities for conferences, workshops and shared networking events around this really important area. So the aim of this forum is to create an opportunity for all sorts of people interested in this area to come together. We want to bring in researchers, scientists, medical professionals, policymakers, advocacy and support groups, and of course, people with stroke and their carers. And we want to bring them together to share the latest evidence and research into this very important but neglected area of care. Our next big event, and this is an early plug for your diary, is for the 10th of March in Barcelona next year. This will be a really important meeting for us because it will be the first time since the pandemic that we were able to get together. More details about this will be at the end of the webinars, but please do put this in your diary now. Before I introduce you to the chair of this morning's session, I first need to thank a few people. So firstly, I'd like to thank my scientific committee. They've helped to put together the content for this session, and I'm very grateful to them. They genuinely are a dream team. I would also, of course, like to thank our very generous sponsors. And frankly, without their help, we would not be able to make this event free and we would not be able to run it at all. So our grateful thanks to them. And finally, I'd also like to thank our partners who help endorse and promote this series of events. And particularly, we'd like to thank, of course, SAFE, who have organised this event and actually made it happen. As with all our Life After Stroke events, the person with the stroke and the carer is at the very centre of what we do. And we hope that you will see this in our sessions today. The voice of the stroke survivor should and must play an essential role in the development of future life after stroke care.
Hello and welcome to this webinar session, Getting Back to Work After a Stroke. And thank you for taking time out of your day and being here. My name is Carina Persson. I'm one of the members of the Scientific Committee of the European Life After Stroke Forum. I have, as a physiotherapist, spent more than 3 decades in the early phase of rehabilitation after stroke at the Sahlgrenska University Hospital in Gothenburg, Sweden. My main driving force has been and is still to make a difference for those who have suffered a stroke. Today, I have the great honor of chairing this session that will be recorded. Going back to work after a stroke is an important goal for many, but it may seem impossible. Yet, despite impairments and a lot of challenges, going back to a professional work is possible. The agenda will feature pre-recorded presentations and interviews on getting back to work after a stroke, based on research and of experiences from clinical work and life after stroke. I'm very happy to be joined here today by 3 amazing people who very soon all will enter the stage. First out is Katarina Stibrand Sunnerhagen. Katarina is Professor of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Gothenburg. Katarina will be followed by Anders Andersson. Anders is a stroke survivor and the first Vice Chairman of the Board of the Stroke Foundation in Gothenburg. Anders, in his turn, will be followed by Catherine Redford. Catherine is a Professor of Rehabilitation Research at the University of Nottingham. And at the end of this session, we will be running a live panel discussion with a Q&A, where you are able to ask a question to Katarina, Anders and Catherine by using the chat function on your screen. By sharing experiences from life after stroke, clinical work, and results from the research. Hopefully, this will start reflections that will end up in actions that will make a difference for stroke survivors. It's time to put a spotlight on stroke. Let us get inspired together to make a difference. The stage is yours, Katarina, Anders, and Katrin. Welcome, everyone. Getting back to work after stroke, does it matter?
That's a very good question. Yes, it matters. It matters for the person. It matters for society in different ways. So it is something that has been neglected by healthcare, by researchers for many years, but we know from the dialogue with the stroke survivors that yes, it does matter.
As your experience as a senior physician at rehabilitation medicine at Högsbo Sahlgrenska University Hospital in Sweden, what are the challenges that the stroke survivors experience upon return to work after a stroke?
There are many challenges, and I would say it varies depending on the individual. I mean, if you have a paresis, if you have mobility problems, there are certain challenges that you would affect your possibilities to return to work, depending on what work you have. If you have hidden problems, such as cognitive problems or communication problems, there are other problems, other challenges. So there's always this balance between your ability and the demands of life, and in life there is also including the work. Because, I mean, the reason that we get paid for work is that our employer actually thinks that we do something that is worthwhile. So you get paid because of you produce, whether it's a service or you make a car or you serve hamburgers, you get paid because you do something that's worthwhile. And so your employer has to think that they need you back to work. So that's also a dialogue that has importance on the possibilities. So the ability of the person and the demand of the work. And that also means that you have to be able to live your ordinary life at home before you can go back to work.
What are the success factors when returning to work after a stroke?
Well, I have to be very honest. Both you and I are females. Being a male is a success factor that we actually can't do much about. It's a societal thing that if you are male, there are more lenience towards not functioning completely well. Being a male going back to work, having a good education is a success factor, and having a boss at work who values you and sees you as a positive thing, that is also a success factor. But the demands are different for females and males when it comes to return to work.
Return to work as an endpoint or as a part of the rehabilitation. How can the mindset affect, do you believe?
I think it's very important to realize that getting back to work is part of rehabilitation, and it's not the end point, because it's very easy to return to work, but what we want people to do is to remain at work and to be able to work for the time that they had anticipated before retirement, which means that they might have to change work content or work hours in order to be able to last for a long time, and not just to get back to work, manage it for a few months and then go on another sick leave because they have overworked themselves or overstrained themselves. So it has to be one step on the journey back to life. And it's an important step, but it's not the final step. The final step is that you have retired and you have a long life and you live happily ever after until you die by something else or old age.
There are many actors in the care chain. What are the lessons to get back to healthcare when it comes to return to work after a stroke?
I think it's very important, actually, if you have meet a person at the stroke unit, and if they are in the age group that normally works, it's actually important to address that. If they are awake, and to address it early, to say that return to work is something that will take time, to sort of set the mindset of the patients already there, and that's the responsibility for the whole stroke unit team. And then later on, when we meet people as outpatients, the roles are different. I mean, the physician has certain roles when it comes to writing papers for sick leave, etc. The social worker is involved, has her or his role when it comes to discussing with the employer and the rules and regulation for that country. The OT, the occupational therapist, and the psychologist have a larger role when it comes to return to work, because very often the problems with return to work in the long run is not mobility, which people think first, but it's the stamina and the problem solving and the cognitive aspects that actually has a role. And if you have aphasia, of course, the speech and language therapist, you need to be able to communicate. So depending on where you work in the stroke care chain, the content of the roles differs regarding return to work. And in some countries, there's vocational rehabilitation where people are specifically trained to work on return to work, which I think is also a very good factor. So we have to set our minds that the journey begins from the beginning. I mean, it starts, we should not forget about returning to work because people worry when they are in the bed in the stroke unit. They worry about losing their jobs, they worry about finances, they worry about what the bosses say. So we need to address them and say that we will help you with that when the right time comes, so they're not very sick at the hospital.
Some occupations have different routes. How do we handle with that?
I think it's important to understand and to know that for instance, when it comes to driving trains, piloting, flying an airplane and so on, or being on a ship, that there are rules and regulations, and those varies between the countries, but there are very strict rules for your health condition, or for instance, you're working at an oil platform. So those are rare patients that we meet, and we just have to be aware of that there are rules and regulations. We have to check up what are the rules and regulations for that specific vocation. It could be that there are, like for instance in Sweden, there are only a few physicians that are allowed to check pilots whether they are allowed to fly a plane or not. So just be aware of everything that has to do with mobility, driving taxis, serving other people, or working at sea or in space. That most of us physicians have no clue, or healthcare professionals, exactly what rules there are. So be aware and check.
Hello everyone, my name is Katarina Sydran-Sönnerhagen. I'm a professor in rehabilitation medicine at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. I will talk to you about getting back to work. Is that important? I have no conflicts of interest. This talk will deal with certain aspects such as what is stroke and the number of strokes in the world, what is work, factors associated with return to work, factors hindering work, and time as a factor for work return. Stroke, as you all know, is the consequences of having a blockage of oxygen getting to the brain, whether this is a blockage due to a clot, such as in an ischemic stroke, or a broken vessel, such as in a hemorrhagic stroke. However, the incidence of people getting stroke in working age over the world seem to increase, and this has been shown from different continents in the world. The stroke leads to physical, cognitive impairments as well as psychological problems, and all of those can influence work capacity. That has also been shown from different countries. So the question then is, what is the level of work return after a stroke? This study that made a meta-analysis of different articles that has been published showed that the level of return to work varied between 0 and 100%. So you see there is a large variation, and we still don't really know what we can expect when we talk to a patient about returning to work. We also need to talk about the definitions. I mean, what does it mean to return to work? Are we talking about the same work, the same chores, a different workplace? If your country or society has adapted work, is that counted as return to work? Or if you have different hours of work compared to earlier? I know from my own experience when I've been doing studies together with 7 countries regarding return to work, that in China, for instance, if you were a farmer and were able to take up your farm again after your stroke, that didn't count as return to work since you had not an employment. So this is very social content dependent. And also, this is not described in the papers, the situation for return to work. In order to work, you need a balance between your ability and demand of life. And this is true whether you have a stroke or not, that we need to have this balance. As long as we're healthy, we usually have a lot of extra strength or reserve capacity that we can lean on when necessary. But after a stroke, this reserve capacity is often less than earlier, and this balance is more difficult to keep. And you need to take the stamina, which is often lacking, more into consideration in order to have a good life after stroke. And also we have to realize that all jobs are not feasible even if you're healthy. Myself, I would not be able to do this kind of work even though I haven't had a stroke as these building workers in Manhattan constructing a high-riser, nor would I be able to work in forestry like in this picture, or on a fishing ship out on the ocean, or constructing roads in Vietnam. So if we look at return to work on a population, this shows that a number of people have had a stroke, and about 20,000 of those were included in the study. And in that meta-analysis, 62% were at work 2 years after stroke. And this all has to do with the adaptation to the consequences after stroke. Why is it important to discuss return to work after stroke? Well, it is of importance for society. Having a stroke is costly for the patient, but it's also costly for the society. There's a lack of income for the patients, but there's also a lack of taxes for society. It has also importance for the person, not only due to income, but also the role and the perception of yourself as a capable person in order to support your family and to bring home food to the table. And there's a variation in the level of return to work in different studies. We have shown in an article that the own expectations on return to work at 12 months gave 3 times higher odds in return to work. This is based on data from the Swedish Riksstroke Register, where questionnaires are sent out to all stroke survivors 12 months post-stroke, and they answer the question whether they think they will be able to get back to work or not. However, getting back to work also has consequences for health. What we have shown is that better general health, less pain or feeling in depression at 1 year and 5 years were present in those that had returned to work at 1 year. So it seems like being able to return to work gives you a better health. However, we have also shown that those that had returned to work at 1 year, they also deteriorated in their perception of general health and increase of pain at 5 years, which was not seen in the no return to work group. And the return to work group, however, assessed quality of life overall better than the non-return to work. This gets a bit complicated, so we show this again in these Sankey diagrams. To the left, we have the return to work group, and to the right, the not return to work group. And you see that the perception of general health varies between very good, fairly good, very bad, and pretty bad. And those to the left in the 2 quadrants, you have the 1 year estimate of the general health, and to the right, you have the 5-year estimate. And what we can see is that the return to work group, there was a significant deterioration in the feeling of general health compared to no change at all in the no return to work group. Well, we've also done qualitative studies and looked at return to work and maintaining work long time after stroke, 7 to 8 years, and we found 4 themes. One theme was being motivated and return to work while struggling with impairments. One was mixed feelings in the return to work process. The third was still at work, although restricted. And the fourth, social support for a sustainable work situation. This citation says that my boss says, I see you're tired. You need to rest. You need a break. Sit down there in the corner in my recliner and rest. I can see it in your eyes that you need a break, so I'm shutting you down, just like a machine. a little and I would keep working. This was a citation from a 48-year-old woman who had social support from her boss. I'm happy to be able to work 75% because I had a large stroke. So the idea that I'm able to work at all, that's completely amazing. 50-year-old woman, still at work, although restricted. They warned me that I would be fatigued and stuff like that, but I thought I could handle it quite well with the gradual steps that I took. And then there were planned rest days. Then the doctor said, people manage to start working pretty well, but it's important that you have longer recovery times that are not broken up. A 50-year-old man. He also expresses mixed feelings in getting back in the return to work process. So what are the predictors to return to work? Well, there are negative predictors such as having sick leave prior to your stroke, being dependent in modified ranking scales, and this is worse for women. If you have a severe stroke and a higher NIHSS on admittance to the hospital or impaired consciousness at admittance. Positive factors are male sex, qualified occupation if you're a man, a long university education, ischemic stroke, your own expectations to return to work, and younger age. Predictors for return to work are same in different countries. This is a study from Nigeria that shows that having no significant disability or mild disability increased the odds for return to work. And the overall return to work in this Nigerian study was 55%. If we go to Japan, we can see that the time to return to work continued over the time that there was follow-up for more than 500 days. And this is also shown in data from Australia, where we can see that people were independent at 28 days had a higher chance of returning to work, but also those that were dependent managed to get back to work. But there was a difference in the time scale, how much you get back to work and when. And we've looked at this also from the studies in Sweden, where we could see that most of the patients actually went back to work within the first year, almost 60% within the first year, but the level of return to work continued up to 3 years post-stroke. Men had a bit higher chance of getting back to work than women in this study. So to conclude, it is still unclear how many that actually return to work after stroke. The definition of work has to be clear. With time, more persons seems to be able to get back to work, but work may not be healthy for everyone. So with those words and these pictures from my hometown during the fall, I would say thank you very much and good luck with the rest of the conference.
Hi, my name is Anders, and I was working as a project manager at Volvo IT here in Gothenburg, Sweden. I was only 30 years when I got my stroke.
On your return to work, how much did you work initially?
Initially, I worked 25%, and then half year I moved up to 50%, and then another half year I moved up to 75%, and then I took it 100%.
After a while, you realized that you couldn't handle it. How did your fatigue affect you?
Well, that's the hard part. At Volvo, they have restrooms. You eat your lunch and you go to that room and sleep for an hour or a half an hour or something.
Okay.
That was perfect. But after I got fired, move on. I searched for many jobs as a project manager. I got a job at Telia as a consultant, where I was. They had no restrooms.
No restrooms.
No restrooms. So I had to go to the restrooms and lay on the floor and slept there.
On the floor?
Oh yeah, at the toilets.
At the toilet?
Oh yeah. Now it seems pretty sounds silly for me to sleep in the toilet,
Yes.
but I talk to within myself. I know that this is no good.
No.
But I still did it because I thought that, well, this is it. I have no other job. I need to do this.
Yes.
And since I left the hospital, what should I do now? Well, it's only work for me.
Mm.
And then I took these feelings and put it in my back, and I just showed on. I just tried to work because I knew somewhere in me, I knew that this isn't right. This is not the way that I should work.
No.
But this is how it looked for me.
Yes.
It was this or nothing else. Working was okay. I could work a couple of hours in the before lunchtime.
Yes.
And after that, it wasn't no good. It was just.
How did you feel then?
I felt excluded from work. I couldn't. It's hard to try to explain this, but in some words, it felt like I was at the work, and still I wasn't at the work. There was some sort of no good.
Another turn was made in life. Would you please tell us about it?
This was after I had quit my job or quit. I was forced to leave in about a half a year, 6 months, and they said it's not working. Okay, I understand, but how should I do this? I need to find a doctor that could take me. Went to a house doctor, and he only gave me some pills about I should feel happy again.
Okay.
So that wasn't the pills I needed, because I was feeling worse when I took these.
Okay.
I talked to an aunt of mine. She is a nurse. She told me we need to find you a neuro doctor. So then I started searching, and I found a place I could go to. It's called the Stroke Forum, where they have a doctor and a lot of other stuff. I got a time at the doctor at the neuro, the Stroke Forum, and she started to redo all the basic things. I got to go to a neuro psychology. She was also checking out. It concluded in the end that told me you cannot work anymore because the fatigue is so much taking.
It affects you too much?
Yes.
How did that affect you?
First I feel angry. Why should she say to me I cannot work? That made me angry. Of course I can work. But it took me about a year to understand that, okay, she has gotten some points that are correct. Maybe I should listen to this. And of course, she knew what she was talking about. But it took me about a year, and I found about this stroke association that was helping my kind of illness, where there are the same people as me. They have also gotten a stroke. When I first met these people, it felt such a wonderful feeling. It was, they understand me. I don't have to tell them about why I do this, because they have all the same.
The fatigue continues to affect you.
Yeah.
What are your strategies today?
If I got something planned to do, I need to sleep at lunchtime or so. I have tried a lot of other things like sit in the chair and rest and so on, but that it depends on what kind of task I'm supposed to do. In some days before I do this kind of work, I need to prepare myself. Okay, you need to do this. Takes 2 hours, and then I go to sleep and do another 2 hours show, because I cannot do it in okay, first 2 hours, then lunch and the happiness and everything, and then do it again. Then I will crash, totally crash. It won't work.
No.
My training has caused me to really go to sleep. I need to sleep before I do the next show.
Does stress affect you?
It does sometimes, but not as much as with work or so, because I more and more learn how to deal up the levels of stress I should do. So I feel that if I'm doing this work, I need to do some other stuff, sleep or just sit on this chair and take
A rest.
rest. Yeah.
Yes. Everything has a cost.
It has a cost. I have a daughter. She was 5 when I got the stroke. She is the most valuable reason that I keep going, keep turning, because me and Emma, that's the girl's name, I wanted to give her some nice presents for her birthday, and so I booked a journey to London. I know that it will be a lot of work for me, but in this time she was 15, and she was very happy to go to London with me. But I have to do some before work and after work. And when in London, I was in Hyde Park, and I just told her to Emma, let Daddy take a rest now. Okay, she knew everything, so I just lay on the park bench and I fell asleep. And it's not the ordinary thing to do at the holiday, but for me it was okay, and she understood that. She knew this. Daddy, we take a coffee over there. She understands me a lot better than I do myself.
What does your working life look today?
Today it looks like I work for the Stroke Association a couple of hours a day. We work together with Stroke Forum, which is in the same house. So this is a good two-way street.
And this, based on your experiences on getting back to work after stroke, what are the take-home message to us in healthcare?
When the damage appear, it's totally so it's so good. It's perfect. But after the discharge, I felt that the hospitals felt like, oh, we Anders is done. Someone else will take him, and it doesn't work like that. I have learned because you cannot go to a regular doctor and explain the fatigue or something, and they just it needs to be a neuro. The thing I have reached when I was discharged, it was like they were, yes, another victory for them. They have done their part, and of course, it was done. It was okay, but it still isn't for me because I have a lot of questions. Could be anything that I need to just check with other people. Is this okay? Is this not okay? And
You told us about the follow-up. Nowadays, there are follow-ups from the hospital.
When I heard this about they're working to begin to work on this, I and a lot of other stroke patients said, yes, do this now. It's really important for them also to have someone who listens to them. It's not for me to go to a primary care office and tell them I have these kind of questions, because I need a neuro doctor who could tell me, or not another doctor, it's just someone with knowledge in the stroke area.
Yes. It has been improved.
Improved, yes.
Improved. The way to follow up former patients.
Yeah. Mare has in her stroke team.
A nurse?
Yeah, a nurse. And they are going out to the customer, the patients, to help them with things that they do every day. And
in their homes?
In their homes. And that's a very good way to work on that. Because I had no option to take a neuro doctor or nurse or whatever to my home. But
when you hear about it now, you think that is the thing?
Yes.
Many thanks for inviting me to contribute to this webinar. I'm an occupational therapist and professor of rehab research with an interest in supporting people to get back to work, and this is particularly challenging after stroke. There are a plethora of biopsychosocial and contextual factors that can influence this outcome, and I'm going to illustrate this by drawing on the evidence and also using some case studies embedded in the Return to Work After Stroke trial. Now, in the UK, around a quarter of strokes occur in working age adults. Data from the London Stroke Register studies suggest that of those working before stroke, fewer than half go back to work. And this is true even in those who make a good functional recovery, so an independence, a Bartel index of 19. But only around 48% of those are working at a year and 42% at 5 years. Know that stroke survivors of working age are 2 to 3 times more likely to be unemployed, and those who fail to go back have reduced quality of life and poorer psychosocial outcomes. The cost to society is enormous. It's estimated that around £26 billion per year, and this includes £8.6 billion for health and social care and £1.6 billion in lost productivity. At a person level, around 18% of people report a loss in income, which Patel and colleagues have estimated at an average of around £5,000 to £6,000 per case of stroke in people aged 40 to 64. And this problem and the costs are only set to increase, with the predicted growth in the incidence of first-time stroke, including in people of working age. Now, while biological or stroke impairment-related factors are important determinants of who goes back to work, for example, we know that if you have greater odds of going back to work if you're younger, if you're a man and have had a less severe stroke and can walk and talk. Psychological and social factors are also hugely important determinants of outcome. For example, having a non-manual job and better education, along with believing work is important and that having good family support. In fact, these may be more important determinants of outcome. Using population registry data, Lindstrom et al. Found that believing work was important and not seeing yourself as a burden on others were more important determinants than being able to run a little or higher socioeconomic class. And in the environment, factors like access to rehabilitation and where you access that rehab, so which country you live in, can have a significant influence on work outcomes. We know from the Swedish registry data studies conducted by Westerlind et al. That people continue to return to work for much longer than we previously thought. So while most return within the first 12 months, and while return to work plateaus at around 3 years, this study of 174 people aged less than 63 with first stroke in Gothenburg found that people who continue to return to work for up to 6 years, and that rates are as high as 75%. These are much higher than the London Stroke Register data, suggesting only 18% are working by a year, except if they'd made a good physical recovery. So 48% in those with a Bartel of 19, but only 42% at 5 years. So these differences between countries highlight the importance of the socioeconomic environmental context, the country. Now, Sweden has joined up health and employment system where people don't get sickness benefits unless they participate in rehab, and employers are also financially incentivized to employ people with disabilities. Now, in Westerlind's study, analysis to identify risk factors for non-return to work not surprisingly identified dependency at discharge, but also interestingly sick leave prior to stroke as significant predictors for non-return to work at a year and also 6 years. However, there wasn't any difference in return to work between people who had or didn't have comorbidities, suggesting perhaps that other workplace factors might influence sick leave. Now, another study from this group explored return to work after specialised rehab, and this was in a cohort of more severely disabled persons admitted to specialised stroke rehabilitation units in 7 countries. Logistic regression of the factors predicting return to work at 12 months found, along with the known factors like education, age and disability, the country where the rehab took place was also significantly associated with return to work or not. And what was interesting here, that it wasn't necessarily the countries you might anticipate, so the less well-developed rehab services or maybe weaker economies that had the worst return to work outcomes at 12 months. One centre in Sweden with excellent access to rehabilitation and as we've heard, a supportive socio-political environment, had 12-month return to work rates of around 20%, whereas a service in Russia had rates of 43%, suggesting that outcomes may be influenced by the interplay between personal and socioeconomic factors and things like education and personal wealth, such that people with good access to rehab and supportive policy may be less likely to return if they're in a well-paid job with good pension and thus financially incentivized to retire or relinquish work. Now, I am grasping a little at straws here because this is not a study that's representative of all stroke survivors. But what these studies do hint at is the complex interplay between sociological, biological, and environmental contextual factors, including policy. This complexity is further illustrated by our own attempt to follow up 48 stroke survivor participants from an earlier VR feasibility trial. We used a survey and interview study at 6 years after stroke. Now, at 6 years, only 19 people responded, so 44%, and they were a mean age of 62 at follow-up. Now, most, so 14 out of the 19, were working and had made a good functional recovery. However, they still reported a myriad of residual problems from their stroke, including loss of sensation, weakness, lower tolerance for noise, difficulty with organisational tasks and reduced concentration, memory problems, poor balance, increased fatigue, word-finding difficulties. not feeling robust, a loss of confidence, anxiety, and being reliant on others. They also reported comorbidities like vertigo, and epilepsy, and additional difficulties due to aging. Now, despite the challenges, work was clearly important to the participants in this study, and all of those who returned reported that this was the right decision, and they felt it had helped them return to some sort of normality. 5 of the 19 people were working beyond the age of 65, 2 were self-employed and 3 were doing voluntary work. So despite these high levels of function, many of whom were driving and working, the respondents reported poorer quality of life than at 1 year after stroke, and 2 out of 3 reported clinical levels of anxiety, depression, or both. Just over half also reported a decrease in income. This illustrates a highly individualized picture and a complex relationship between function, work outcomes, and well-being late after stroke that warrants further investigation if attempts to help people not only return to work, but also remain in work and remain well at work are to succeed. So our findings are consistent with those in other studies exploring stroke survivors' lived experience of return to work in terms of not only the importance of stroke impairments, in particular the hidden disabilities and the subjective significance of work in the person's life, but also this meta-synthesis of qualitative literature by Schwartz, which explores barriers enablers to work, highlights the stroke survivor's inability or unwillingness sometimes to accept impairments and limitations, which can result in them either refusing support or adaptations, such as a graded return to work, or underestimating their impairments and limitations, which can result in them going back too early and then failing to remain in work, whereas an overestimation might result in a decision not to return at all. So these all-important personal contextual factors might be related or unrelated to stroke severity, can influence return to work outcomes. And in terms of the workplace itself, disability unfriendly management practices of the employing company or a lack of support from supervisors and colleagues can act as barriers to return to work. Moreover, if the demands of the job exceed the person's abilities, or if the job cannot be adapted adequately, or the employer might be unwilling to adapt the job, they act as barriers to return to work. Now, some of what's missing from the literature on stroke and return to work is evident in research in other conditions and in the wider work and disability literature. For example, we know that workplace discrimination is one of the primary reasons people with MS leave the workforce prematurely. Indeed, in 2016, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Disability commissioned a report that found up to 48,000 disabled people are managed out of their jobs every year. Doctors Kumar and Provost from the UCL Policy Lab published a report earlier this year trying to unpick the reasons for this. And they highlighted that many issues, and among them, discrimination, may not be overt or blatant due to a lack of supportive disability policy, but very subtle, arising from a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge on the part of managers about how to implement workplace disability-friendly policies, and a lack of knowledge and information on how to make reasonable adjustments or on what's available, both on the part of the person with a disability and their line manager. This can result in what they described as a kind of disabled apartheid, where neither party knows quite how to have the conversation, managers are afraid of saying the wrong thing, and the person with disability doesn't want to draw attention to that disability for fear of discrimination. And it's this standoff can extend beyond managers and the employee to other work colleagues. such that the authors also referred to something they called chair envy, whereby co-workers perceive the disabled employee to be unfairly advantaged in some way, leading to a breakdown of workplace relationships, a lack of trust, and a further standoff. Interestingly, interview data with stroke survivors in our studies suggests this may be prevalent in stroke too. So moving on, I'd like to illustrate some of these factors using emerging data from case studies embedded in the Return to Work After Stroke trial. It's a multi-centre trial, which is in the follow-up phase, comparing early stroke specialist vocational rehab delivered by an OT, starting within 8 weeks of stroke, to whatever is available locally in the NHS in the UK. This trial has an embedded process evaluation with the aim of trying to understand the different contexts in which the intervention's delivered and to identify factors that might influence the delivery, receipt, and outcomes of the intervention. Just a quick overview of the intervention itself. It involves OT that starts early, within 8 weeks of stroke, and occurs over 3 stages. It starts with an assessment of the impact of stroke on the person, the family, and the job. Individually tailored vocational rehab that helps prepare the person for work and plan the return to work, and coordinates activity around return to work across the different sectors. It involves education, advice, and emotional support for the person, employer, and family members. It involves the OT mediating workplace adjustments and negotiating a phased return to work, and then monitoring that work to ensure that it's sustainable. It involves ongoing monitoring to problem solve issues with all stakeholders and to explore alternatives where current work cannot be sustained or isn't feasible before the intervention is gradually withdrawn. So as part of this process evaluation, we conducted some longitudinal case studies in a randomly selected 5% of the trial participants. These were 15 people in the intervention arm and 11 in usual care. It involved interviews with stroke survivors at 3 time points and with their carers and with the occupational therapists involved in treating them. And we used framework analysis underpinned by normalisation process theory and the International Classification of Function, Disability and Health to analyse the data. The sample, as you can see, were mostly men with a mean age of 56, 7 of whom were self-employed. The following cases are informed by participants in the study, but they are semi-fictitious. They've been created to illustrate the biopsychosocial factors influencing work outcomes, irrespective of the intervention arm. All names have been replaced by pseudonyms. This is Harry. Harry had a highly skilled technical job involving drawing, writing, and computer use. He ran his own small business and employed several people. Despite having some support in the usual care arm of the trial, he was unable to return to work. His stroke resulted in physical and cognitive impairments, which meant he couldn't deliver the technical side of his job, and communication difficulties, which made running the business challenging. By 12 months after stroke, he hadn't returned and the business had failed. When we look at the factors influencing that outcome, self-employment is typically a driver to return to work. But in small business, like Harry's, with high technical skills required, he was unable to accommodate his own disability and couldn't afford to employ another highly skilled person to take on that role or to oversee the business. He reported being unable to find advice on claiming benefits and was facing financial hardship and business loss. He also had childcare responsibilities with a disabled child at home, and he didn't receive any vocational rehab. The next case is Tim. Tim was a young stroke survivor, aged less than 50, working as a medical professional in the public sector. His stroke left him with significant fatigue, which he attributed to higher order cognitive difficulties. He also had some mild speech and swallowing difficulties. He received the intervention and support with preparing for and negotiating a phased return to work. He had early supported discharge physiotherapy and speech and language therapy and psychology input for a short time. He returned to work in full capacity by 6 months. The influencing factors, not only was he young and highly motivated to go back to work, but he was also under considerable pressure to go back to work sooner due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Carol. Carol was a GP receptionist in her late 50s. Her job involved answering calls, sending emails, reading and writing reports and letters for patients. Her stroke caused her to experience expressive aphasia. She had difficulty making the correct sounds and saying the correct words, as well as some issues with recognising and speaking numbers, and with her upper limb movement, grasp and grip strength in her dominant hand. Now, despite being in the usual care arm, Carol had early supported discharge and some ongoing community rehab, with return to work support from a usual care occupational therapist. She had a good relationship with her line manager pre-stroke and maintained contact with her employers who were supportive of her going back to work. She was motivated and she liked her job. However, she only received statutory sick pay, and this put significant financial pressure on her to return to work early. She started a phased return at 4 months after stroke, and soon after going back to work, despite agreeing amended duties and a phased return, the employers increased Carol's duties and her children were forced to intervene. It's unclear how sustainable Carol's work will be in the longer term. Fred was an HGV driver for a large public sector delivery company. He loved his job and had been doing it for 20 years before the stroke. Despite making a good functional recovery, Fred's stroke left him with visual field loss, which precluded him from driving. As he worked for a large company, which was supportive of his return, he was offered an alternative job, but it was geographically remote from his home and involved night shifts. Not only would getting to work have proved challenging, but he didn't want to do this alternative work, and he chose to retire on medical grounds. For many stroke survivors, stroke can change the meaning and value of work in a person's life, and for some it becomes more important for retaining identity and feeling valued. But not being able to do the work you love can result also in a re-evaluation of goals. Like some of the stroke survivors in our follow-up study, Fred found alternative work as a volunteer at a food bank, which he enjoyed. It was low pressure due to its voluntary nature, and he could do as little or as much as he felt able. This would be considered a positive outcome in the retake trial. So I hope, in summary, to have illustrated some of the complexities and challenges of supporting stroke survivors in a return to work. Yes, stroke-related disability, biological factors such as age and socioeconomic factors such as better education do affect who goes back to work. But it's the contextual factors, both personal, are they motivated? Do they still want to return to work? What if the return to work means the nature of work and all that it means to the person has changed? And environmental, do they need to return to work? Can they afford to live without paid work? Could they volunteer instead? Would this lead to better work-life balance? Plus, of course, the workplace factors. Can the stroke disability be accommodated or not? And will these accommodations remain in place? And personal finances or comorbidities, pre and post-stroke, and other factors in the home such as caring responsibilities may tip the balance in favour of relinquishing work. And of course, the policy environment, both nationally and locally, in terms of how disability policy is implemented. Will this lead to discrimination or unsustainable work? And of course, not forgetting access to and the content of the rehabilitation itself. Is it work focused? So the literature on return to work suggests the relationship between stroke and work is very complex. These case studies highlight that aside from the usual predictors, there's clearly a complex interplay between biopsychosocial, personal, and environmental contextual factors and work outcomes. People's work goals and outcomes can change, irrespective of the stroke disability. In terms of the trial itself, the outcomes are known. But this is only one trial focusing on early vocational rehab for people who have a job at the time of stroke. It has a focus on supporting people in the first 12 months. So it won't tell us how to support those who don't return within that time period, in particular the more severe strokes who may wish to return much later. And so with those thoughts, I will say goodbye and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Hello, now we are live. Thank you very much for those excellent presentations and conversations. It's very interesting to learn about research into this area and hear firsthand what it's like to return to work after a stroke, which is a very important goal for many. I hope this session has shown that return to professional work is possible and has offered practical help on doing this and inspiration to continue engagement in the issue. Now you have all seen the presentations and conversations from our speakers. I would like to ask the audience, having heard the talks today, do you think that you have the confidence to enable someone to return to professional work after a stroke? Please post your answers as you did earlier this morning. I would now like to post the questions that we have came from the delegates in our Q&A, the chat function. And I have a question here to you, Anders. Did anyone speak with you about work, or if you wanted to go back to work when you were in hospital? Now I cannot hear you, Anders. Maybe you there?
Here I am.
Thank you.
Yeah, we talked about it, and we talked about going back 25% to Volvo IT when I was in the care, and they had a small meeting with the staff at the care office and the Volvo team, but I don't think they could believe that I should have gone 25%. That's fine. That was enough. Yeah, but I didn't because I want to make money. Yeah, you know.
Yes, I understand. I have another question.
Can I come in?
Yes.
Yeah, because when I go as a consultant at the hospital nowadays, I mean, I've learned through the years and through the patients that I usually, I mean, now it's November. So when I meet an acute stroke patient, I tell them that I think you should talk to your employer and don't count on being back at work until after the summer. So I've tried to set their minds early that this will take time, even if the patients don't ask. So I say, talk to your employer because they want to know. So I put it outside themselves, and I think that's easier to give the responsibility to the employer and start the thinking early.
We have another question here about the employers. What support is given to employers when an employee wishes to return to work? Is there someone that want to try to?
Yeah, happy to have a go. I think that varies massively. I think one of the things that we've noticed in the UK is that it very much depends on the confidence of the healthcare professionals working with the stroke survivors as to whether they're willing to speak to the stroke survivor about engaging with the employer and actually going into the workplace themselves and start to have those conversations with the line managers. What, in our experience, line managers really welcome that opportunity to speak to a healthcare professional with the stroke survivor and work out how the stroke has had an impact on the job and what recommendations might be made to accommodate the person at work. So a lot of it is to do with confidence around the healthcare professional. But there isn't an awful lot out there in terms of support targeted directly at the employer in the UK. I don't know, Katharina, whether that's different in Sweden.
Katharina, you will come in?
Yes, I can say that it varies depending on, due to the politics and the time. I mean, I can see that it used to be the responsibility from us in Sweden, from the healthcare sector to do this. Now it's the responsibility of the employer, and we as the healthcare sector should not be involved unless we're asked to. I can also say that there's a difference between Sweden and Norway. I worked in both countries, so it varies. So this is country dependent and is policy dependent, and policies change with each election.
We have another question here. Are the statistics that reveal the cost of stroke to employer organizations specifically and to different sized organizations? Do you know anything about this?
I'm not aware of any that are stroke specific, actually singling out stroke as the cost of stroke to different sized organisations. That's certainly something where I think research does need to be done. There may be figures on disability more generally, but I'm not aware of stroke specific ones. So I saw that came from Jane. Jane, that's something that we probably ought to pick up and run with.
Okay. Anders, is there anything that you in retrospect want to add? We have seen the interview with you, but is there anything else that is important for you to have said? Not directly, or do you want to think about it?
I think about it first.
How did you and your colleagues at the Stroke Foundation in Gothenburg, how do you give support to stroke survivors who came to your place?
Just being there for them. They feel that you're the same as you have a stroke, and that means a lot to everybody. It's yeah.
That sounds great. Being there for them.
Yeah, being there for them. Yep.
Don't you have this, or maybe it's not through the Stroke Foundation, but this SMED, Stroke in the Middle of Life, this Facebook group as well?
Oh, yeah.
Which is national. Yeah.
Yep, it is.
Yeah.
That's one part of it.
Yeah.
And it's closed, so I cannot go in.
Katharina, a question to you. What impact does it have for stroke survivors, their relatives, and their healthcare that work is included in the post-stroke checklist that can be used for a structured follow-up?
I think it's very important that return to work as a possibility should be discussed as soon as possible with the patient and the relatives also, so it's not forgotten. And I mean, it cannot be taken for granted. And as we showed in our studies, and as well as Anders' history, as he told, work is not always healthy. It has a cost. It takes a toll, and maybe it's not the best solution for that person. So it needs to be addressed as one possible alternative for life after stroke, but it's not always that it should be the only one. I mean, it could be having a meaningful life. It's not only having a work. There are other things in life as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's very important that the patient get this, being involved in the talks about this, because they feel left outside, if not so. Yeah.
Yes, very important. Kate, how could we upskill clinicians to address work needs?
I think there are various ways we can do this. I know that in the UK, there is a stroke task and finish group at the moment trying to develop resources to help upskill therapists and help to give them the confidence. One of the things that we have been doing as part of our trial is providing expert mentoring to therapists. So providing a bit of training, but then expert mentoring to help them help the people that they don't feel quite confident to help them go into the workplace and have those conversations with employers. So just giving them that extra bit of confidence to do the things that they're a little bit anxious about. So maybe some sort of community of practice around work that provides that expert mentoring support for therapists that are just not quite sure, but need a bit of extra help, and then we can sort of roll out this support on a wider scale.
Thank you. Anders, we have another question to you here. Did you feel that you had to make your employee aware of the effects of stroke, or were they already aware?
They were.
Their own research?
The employee wasn't ready. They needed a lot of knowledge before, and the healthcare at the employers at the Volvos, they don't know about stroke either. So that's a very it's a complex issue. It's
yes, very very complex. Kate, again, how can we improve the care chain in addition to conducting home visits and follow-ups?
I think one of the big challenges, and this will vary again country by country, is that is the resource, a lack of resource to continue for as long as people really need the support. And I think when we see that, people are thinking about going back to work often much later than we originally anticipate. But follow-up after stroke has mostly ended by 6 months after stroke. Then we really need to be thinking how we address the needs of people who haven't returned by 6 months, or who are not ready to return by that length of time. How do we address those needs later? So it does need to be an integral part of stroke rehabilitation, not a bolt-on. It needs to be an integral part of that pathway, but it needs to be early, later, and then later still. So responding to people's needs as they change over time, and also being able to respond to people whose work situation changes, because we can't just assume that once the person's gone back to work, everything will be fine indefinitely. People need to be able to come back for the support when they need it later.
Yes, and regarding what just been said, Katarina, the right effort to the right individual at the right time. How well can this be done with the current infrastructure for stroke rehabilitation, stroke care?
I think it can be done if we are managing our resources smartly. I mean, not everyone needs support the whole time, but it's important to have a return ticket. So that, I mean, once you're sent out and you left the responsibility to the other organization in the care chain, that when problems come back, that they actually should be able to write or to phone or to email and say that, hey, this is not functioning, we need some more extra help with this or that. And that can be the patient, it could be the healthcare professional, or perhaps the employer. So I think we should talk to the patients, that they allow us to have an open dialogue with their employers and the next healthcare profession.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to round up this session. Time flies when you have nice. For your information, for this session, you can receive 1 CPD after completing the survey, the follow-up survey. So just for your reminder. And thank you very much for joining us. We hope you have enjoyed this session this morning. We also hope that you are able to join the next session, Fatigue After Stroke, at 11:45 Central European Time. Take care of you. Thank you very much. See you soon.